The last thing Maren Voss said before she walked onto that stage was that the theater felt different. Not the lighting. Not the crowd. The theater. She said it the way you say something when part of you already knows the answer and the rest of you isn't ready to hear it. Then she walked into the lights, opened her mouth, and sang. The performance ended at 9:47 p.m. The power failed at 9:49. And at 10:12, in total, complete darkness, every single person in that theater heard Act 3 begin again. No one was on stage. The Alderton Opera House is 140 years old. Stone walls. 340 seats arranged in a horseshoe around a stage built, according to its original blueprints, so that sound would appear to come from everywhere at once. The architect considered this his greatest achievement. The 14th of November. Sold out? Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, one of the most punishing operas ever written, built around a soprano who must carry grief and madness across 2.5 hours without cracking. Maren Voss had been singing this role for 22 years. Critics called her voice the kind that makes you feel you're hearing the music for the first time. She was 54. In full health. No history of anything unusual. Before the show, the stage manager, David Prill, asked how she was feeling. She paused longer than usual. She said she felt watched. Then she smiled, adjusted her costume, and walked toward the stage. Prill thought nothing of it. He would think about it every day for the next 3 years. Act 1 was flawless. 3 audience members, who never spoke to each other, all used the same phrase in interviews afterward. They said that when Maren sang, the sound didn't seem to come from the stage. They meant it as a compliment. Later, they weren't sure what they meant. Intermission. A stagehand named Carla Reyes passed Maren's dressing room. The door was shut. She knocked. No answer. She assumed Maren was resting. Singers do that, go somewhere inward before they go back out. She forgot to knock again. Act 2 began. Maren was on stage. She sang. The house didn't breathe. But here is the thing Carla Reyes put in writing, in a formal statement, to the theater's insurance company, weeks later. She had no memory of Maren leaving the dressing room. One moment the corridor was empty. The next, the performance was underway. She assumed she had simply missed it. She would keep assuming that for a long time. Act 2 ended at 9:47 p.m. The applause was enormous. Maren took her bows. The house lights came up for intermission. At 9:49 p.m., every light in the Alderton Opera House went out. Not a flicker. Not a slow fade. Everything, simultaneously, instantly gone. Emergency lighting is required by law to activate within 8 seconds. The Alderton system had been certified as fully operational 4 months prior. It didn't activate. Engineers examined it the following morning. Batteries charged. Wiring intact. Sensors showing no fault. When they tested the system in daylight, it worked perfectly. It had simply not worked that night. No explanation was ever found. 340 people sat in the dark. And for the first time all evening, the rain was audible, coming through the roof, filling the silence, making the darkness feel like the inside of something. The theater manager had a torch. He asked everyone to stay seated. They did. For 23 minutes, nothing happened. People described those 23 minutes differently. Some said 10 minutes. Some said an hour. Several said that at some point during the blackout, the silence changed quality, as though the room was holding something back, the way a person holds their breath before they say the thing they've been afraid to say. One audience member, Gerald Ashby, a retired architect, 30 years a regular at the Alderton, became convinced there was someone standing in the aisle beside him. He could see nothing. Darkness was total. But the certainty was absolute. The kind that arrives below the level of thought and doesn't wait to be questioned. He reached out his hand into the aisle. He touched nothing. He held his hand there for a long moment anyway. When he pulled it back, he told the interviewer he was relieved. He couldn't fully explain why. At 10:12 p.m., the singing started. It began with the opening bars of Act 3. The conductor, Martin Selby, was sitting in the wings. He confirmed it before speaking to a single other witness. What he heard was live. Acoustic. Present in the room the way only a human voice is present, with breath, with the slight imprecision that no recording can mimic, with the sense of a body producing the sound. The voice was Maren Voss's voice. Her exact timbre. Her exact register. The brightness in her upper notes, which her vocal coach had once described as light coming through glass, unmistakable. It was coming from the stage. 3 audience members pressed record on their phones. The voice sang the opening phrase of Act 3 with a precision and weight that multiple witnesses described, independently, as the finest singing they had ever heard. One woman wept. She said it wasn't fear, not at first. It was closer to grief. As though the voice was mourning something that hadn't happened yet. Selby sat in the wings for 40 seconds before he moved. He said later, "I knew something was wrong. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. And those two things existed at the same time." He walked onto the stage. Torch on. Swept the beam across the center. Empty. The singing continued for 11 more seconds after his torch found nothing. Then it stopped. Someone in the audience turned on their phone torch and pointed it at the front row. Maren Voss was sitting in seat C7. Full costume. Hair pinned. Hands folded in her lap. Looking at the stage. The lights came back on at 10:19. Maren was calm. Oriented. She knew her name, the date, the city. She had no memory of leaving her dressing room. No memory of walking through the wings. No memory of sitting in seat C7. Her last clear memory was standing in the dressing room after the Act 2 curtain, removing her gloves, thinking the second act had gone well. Then the theater manager was beside her. She was in the front row. Her hands were folded. She didn't know how any of it had happened. A doctor saw her within the hour. A neurologist, 2 days later. Both found nothing. No seizure. No dissociative episode. No physiological cause. The neurologist wrote, "The patient presents as neurologically intact. No triggering factor has been identified." No triggering factor. On the 28th of January, 10 weeks after the performance, Maren Voss announced her retirement. She was 54. In full voice. Considered by many to be at the peak of her powers. The statement said personal reasons. It said nothing about November. David Prill tried to reach her in February. She replied once by text. She said she was fine. She said she was resting. She didn't reply again. Martin Selby saw her once more, by accident, at a gathering in the spring. He said she seemed like herself, warm, present, entirely normal. Until someone across the room laughed, and the sound rang off the high ceiling. Maren went still. Just for a second. She recovered. Kept talking. Smiled. But Selby watched her for the rest of the evening. She never looked up at the ceiling again. 3 phones. 3 recordings. All captured the same thing. Poor quality. Consumer microphones in darkness don't give you much. But the voice was there. And an acoustic analyst, whose work had been used in legal proceedings, was given a single question. Is this voice consistent with Maren Voss? 6 weeks later, yes. Frequency, resonance, vibrato rate, upper register timbre, all consistent. The analyst wrote, "I find no acoustic evidence that these are different voices." The recordings were 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. Maren Voss's voice was not the only thing on them. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds, beneath the primary voice, layered under it, there is a second voice. Not an echo. Not a reflection. A second voice. Harmonizing. Moving with such precision that it either knew every note in advance, or it had always known them. The analyst flagged it with one line. The presence of a secondary vocal element in the lower register is noted. I am unable to determine its source. Personnel records. Cast lists. Every performance in a decade. Reference databases. Nothing matched. The voice matched nothing. A historian named Frances Webb submitted archive requests to the Alderton 3 weeks after the incident. She was retired, not affiliated with any investigation. She documented old buildings for her own interest. She found what she found because no one had thought to look. 107 years earlier, the 3rd of February, a performance of the same opera, Lucia di Lammermoor, was interrupted by a power failure. Gas lighting then. The failure was blamed on a supply line blockage. But the administrator's ledger, handwritten, ink faded to the color of old tea, unopened for decades, recorded that during the darkness, the audience heard singing. From the stage, where no one was standing, the performance resumed. The prima donna that night, a soprano named Marta Sabo, completed the evening. She gave notice of her retirement the following morning. She never performed again. Frances Webb found one more document. A letter from Marta Sabo to the Alderton's director. Brief. Polite. One sentence that Webb photographed and read to interviewers in the flat, careful voice of someone who had decided not to let it show. Marta Sabo wrote, "The building has a voice of its own. I will not compete with it again. The Alderton continues to operate." No further incidents on record. But Frances Webb, in her final interview, mentioned something she had left out of her research. Too anecdotal, she said, for a document built on evidence. She had visited the Alderton in the spring. A member of staff let her in early, before the house opened. She walked the building alone, corridors, dressing rooms, wings, and stepped out onto the edge of the stage. 340 empty seats. She stood there for perhaps 30 seconds. And in that silence, she heard something. Not singing. Not a voice. More like the memory of a sound. The way a room holds the shape of something that happened inside it long after the thing itself is gone. She walked out. She didn't go back. The second voice has never been identified. 6 analysts. 2 years. All 6 reached the same conclusion. The voice is real. The voice is unidentified. The voice knew every note. No cast list. No program credit. No record of any singer at the Alderton across 140 years who could have left that voice behind. Nothing. The architect who built the Alderton wrote that sound in his building would feel as though it comes from everywhere at once. He considered this his greatest achievement. We don't know what else he put into those walls. We don't know what he understood about what sound leaves behind. What we know is this. Maren Voss walked into that building as the greatest soprano of her generation. She walked out and never sang again. And on 3 recordings, sitting in a temperature-controlled archive room right now, a voice that no one has ever named begins to harmonize with hers at 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And it does not miss a single word. There is a concert hall in Vienna where something similar happened. Except that time, the lights were on. And 3 people in the audience saw who was sitting at the piano.